I'm Sophie and I love books.
I'm Rudi and I love movies, and this is It Was a Book First, the podcast about new book-to-screen adaptations. Today, we're headed to Provincetown and learning to shuck oysters as we discuss Tony, A24's new mini adaptation of Anthony Bourdain's acclaimed memoir, Kitchen Confidential. Directed by Canadian filmmaker Matt Johnson, Tony stars Dominic Sessa as the acclaimed chef, writer, and TV host during the summer he spent learning to work in a kitchen in Provincetown, Massachusetts. The film also stars Antonio Banderas, Stavros Halikias, Emilia Jones, and Leo Woodall.
If you're new here, Rudi and I are culture reporters, and on this podcast, we discuss the page-to-screen adaptations that everyone's talking about. I read the book, we both watch the TV or movie, and then we discuss the differences and what we thought of the new adaptation. And yes, that means there will be spoilers throughout for the film Tony, as well as for all of Kitchen Confidential, the memoir.
Later in this episode, we'll be joined by a special guest, Tim Carman, a longtime food reporter and critic at the Washington Post, who actually appeared in an episode of Bourdain's No Reservations TV show and recently wrote the piece, What the Anthony Bourdain Biopic Misses About His Life and Legacy. But before we get into Tony, we're going to appropriately, I think, start in New York, where Bourdain lived when he wasn't traveling the world. So I was in the city last weekend, and Sophie and I got to meet up in person for the first time since a corporate retreat in 2024. It was so good to see you, Sophie.
It was so good to see you too. Honestly, Rudi, I think this is the first time we've ever gotten to hang out without having to do like OKR goal building activities and like icebreakers. And so it was just a pleasure to meet your wife and to just walk around with you guys and chit chat.
Yes, we got to walk around Central Park. I got to meet Simon, and I think some of our listeners know, but maybe not all of our listeners know that Simon is the democratically elected dog mayor of New York, and I got to watch him really listen to the concerns of his constituents, and it was very funny. I mean, Simon got recognized several times on our walk, which was very amusing.
Yeah, it's always ridiculous to be with people when that happens. It's like, yes, my dog is a local niche celebrity. This is my life. But yeah, it was really fun to get to talk about. I think we worked really hard to not talk about Tony on purpose, knowing we were going to record this, which was tough.
Yes, it was. And unfortunately, your boyfriend, Kevin, couldn't join us on our walk, but I did get to meet him, Kevin, who designed our website. Shout out, Kevin. I got to meet Kevin later that evening at a concert that we were both attending in Queens.
Rudi, do you want to tell people the concert journey just very briefly that you've been on the last, 10 days?
So I've kind of been on tour for the last 10 days following one of my favorite bands, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. If you listen to our Margot's Got Money Troubles episode way back when we launched a couple months ago, you'll hear me shout them out because they have a song in that show. But yeah, I followed them. They're an Australian band that has 28 albums. They do all sorts of different genres. They're super fun. And I went to Colorado for their festival for a couple nights with a friend of mine from college. And then I did 4 nights in New York, one of which was when I got to meet Kevin. And it was really fun. They were great shows. The last 2 were rave shows because they're in like a techno phase right now. So they're making like EDM techno rave music with an analog synthesizer, and it's like crazy, weird, fun stuff. But I also did some movie stuff in New York because, of course, and one of them was, I saw this movie, maybe you've heard of it, Sophie. It's called The Odyssey.
Rudi, what number time is this for you at this point?
Third time.
Okay, I thought it was going to be higher.
Still a charm. I got to see it in IMAX 70 millimeter. At the AMC Lincoln Square, which was incredible. This was Lauren's first time my wife Lauren, her first time going to that theater. And it's just this gigantic, like 80-foot or 100-foot tall screen. It's crazy. And I think it was interesting watching it for a third time because the first time is, we talked about on 2 recent episodes that if you're new, go check those out. We've talked extensively about this movie. The first time was very much, okay, I'm absorbing everything and like trying to make sense of it. The second time I was like, yeah, this movie rules. Third time it was like, wow, I'm like watching like a classic that I feel like I've seen like so many times. Like at this point it was like, I feel like this movie was like years old because it just like I knew all the beats, and like the big difference was getting to see it on film on this giant screen with people who I think were seeing it for the first time. I think there were a handful of people who had not seen it yet because the way they were reacting was like they were just seeing it unfold for the first time. So very cool to get to do that at a 10 a.m. Friday, essentially sold out screening at the AMC there.
It's how God intended it.
Exactly. And then I also squeezed in one more movie at Film at Lincoln Center, so not to be confused with Lincoln Square, although they are very close to each other. This is a wonderful series of theaters. I think they have 3 screens in 2 different locations that shows a lot of indie and foreign and smaller films. And they were actually screening speaking of another recent episode, they were screening Late Fame in one of the 2 screens in the theater that I was in. And then I went to see Kiyoshi Kurosawa's new movie, The Samurai and the Prisoner. This is a Japanese film. And unlike most of the movies that I mentioned at the top of an episode, this one is actually based on a book. It's based on a 2021 novel of the same name by, I'll butcher this person's name, but Honobu Yonezawa, I believe is the author's name. It's based on historical events. It's kind of like a thinking man's samurai movie. It follows this Japanese lord whose castle is under siege by a warlord. It's not violent. It's not super action packed. I mean, there is violence, but like it's not like this, swords and fighting kind of movie that a lot of samurai movies are. Instead, it's more like palace intrigue, a little bit of a morality play, and it actually begins as a whodunit. So the Lord is investigating a series of murders that take place within his castle. So it's kind of this like interesting, I've heard it compared to Columbo, a little bit of that. There's some like kind of silly things that happen, but it's mostly a very serious, kind of meditative, sprawling and very novelistic film that is beautifully shot, really well staged, great performances. And I really enjoyed it. I'd be curious to know a little bit about the adaptation changes. But it feels like a novel. It has this long sort of arc and takes place over several different seasons. And really enjoyed getting to see it in this very cool theater that clearly appreciates cinema and tries to keep it alive and get it out there for New Yorkers. So had a really fun time in New York and was glad we got to see each other. Glad I got to take in some movies along with the music. So now let's talk about Anthony Bourdain, who I think is a figure that looms large for both of us. If you somehow don't know who Anthony Bourdain is, I mean, he is
Are you listening?
Well, no, he's a writer who became a chef, who became a TV host, and kind of became a travel journalist, really, in his final act, and is, I think, one of the most beloved, also controversial figures who really changed how we think about food, not only what is like on the plate, but what food can do for people and communities, and how people kind of literally break bread. And that's one of the most fascinating things about him and his career. And Sophie, I'm curious to hear about your background with Bourdain and how you came to sort of know him.
Yeah, I'm a huge Anthony Bourdain fan. I first came to him through early seasons of Top Chef. I just remember him being, I was a huge fan of that show, like seasons, let's say 1 through 6. Yeah. And he was one of my favorite guest stars as one of the guest judges on the show. He had such amazing one-liners and was really thoughtful in his critique and would sort of give it to them, but in a cool, respectful way. Yeah. I just really liked his vibe. And this Parts Unknown, really, his documentary series with, I think mostly with CNN.
That was with CNN,
it originally aired.
Yes, it was No Reservations on Travel and then Parts Unknown on CNN.
I watched those 2 shows. I've probably seen every episode at least once. Yeah. It was my background relaxing TV, or my like coming home drunk from the bar TV a lot in my 20s. And especially I think at a time in my life, I was really fortunate to travel a lot earlier in my life with my family, and then was, really broke in my 20s and couldn't really go anywhere. And so it was just such an exciting way to sort of explore the world. It made me want to go places so much. And I first read Kitchen Confidential, I think in 2020, I want to say.
So after he died.
Much later. The I remember his death. I was sort of like, why have I not read this book? It was talked
Yeah,
about
I'm
so
surprised.
much. And I'm sure, I wouldn't be surprised if you, like me, I think his death was one that really impacted me and a lot of
Sure.
people in a way that was not that, we're not used to celebrity deaths affecting us in odd ways we don't always understand why we're grieving for. But I think that one in particular, there was a post online at the time that has always stuck with me, which is everyone wanted to be him and he didn't want to be himself. And
Oh,
that has
it's
always
yeah.
just really hit me in the gut and
Hmm.
made me have so much just context for the way I view him and his work. And I will just say, going into all of this, if you have not read Kitchen Confidential, separate from anything we're going to talk about it in the
Hmm.
context of this movie, please go read this book
Oh, it's a
and
great
please go
book.
get the
Yeah.
audiobook because he reads
Mm.
it. And the gift of having him read that book and his experiences, it is a joy. I went back to re-listen to the chapters for this episode and just kind of kept going for a while and ended up listening to another like 3 hours of it before remembering I had other things on my to-do list to listen to. It is an all-time great memoir.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny to hear you. This is a rare instance where I read the book before you. So I think I read it in college. I don't really remember, but I am a big fan of celebrity memoirs. Like I
Mm-hmm.
love reading people talk about their life and their craft. I remember like Stephen King's On Writing left a mark on me
Yep.
when I was younger, and I've always just enjoyed, especially reading writers talk about their lives, like people who, and Bourdain, as this movie is one of the things that is accurate about it is that, and we'll get more into some of the differences, is that he wanted to be a writer. That was what he wanted to be
Yeah.
before he had any intention of being a chef. And so I read it in college. I loved it. I definitely watched No Reservations. I watched less Parts Unknown. I think I kind of like tapped out a little bit when he moved to
Mm-hmm.
CNN, but I remember watching, like you, No Reservations was a post college, or post
Yeah.
drinking in college show, or just hanging out in the afternoon in college. I remember,
Yep.
his so much stands out from the book, but I also remember just things like his hangover cure, take an aspirin, drink a nice cold Coke, smoke a joint, and eat some spicy Sichuan food. Like there are
Honestly.
all these things that are like ingrained in me. There are stories from Kitchen Confidential that are ingrained in me. I will also note, relevant to this episode, that I dated a girl in high school whose family spent a week every summer in Provincetown. So I have been there
Ah,
a couple times. I'm always doing Bear Week, which was always interesting.
fun.
And
I
it
did
is
plan
a
a bachelorette party there, which
oh, did you
feels like
really?
good
Oh, cool. So
qualifications.
you've been there
Yes.
as well.
I have been there for that one experience.
Yeah, and it's a
Yes.
lovely little town. Like
Oh,
obviously great
lovely.
seafood. I mean, when they drove past the drive-in movie theater in Wellfleet, I was like, oh, in the movie, I was like, I'm pretty sure I've been there, so that's cool. Definitely been to some of those
Yeah.
restaurants and stuff. But yeah, Bourdain is someone who he just seemed impossibly cool,
Oh,
and
beyond.
is someone that like I've just always appreciated. He was always game for doing so many different things.
To me, the best things in life are sort of like highbrow, lowbrow, everything. And I think it was his ability to show us like every side of
Yes.
food culture, that it could literally be like a bowl of noodles you're getting, like
Yep.
where you took a like tut tut somewhere through like a bunch of fields and you don't know how you got there, or you could be at Le Bernardin, like dining with
Yes.
Eric Repair. And these are equal, valuable experiences, and we
Yep.
should learn and appreciate all of it. I think just is such a radically important way of thinking that he just lived in all of the media he put out there for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that's always stood out to me about him too is that he found his fame late in life, right? I think he
Mm-hmm.
was 43 when Kitchen Confidential was published. And that kind of made him the personality that we all came to know him as. But Kitchen Confidential started as a book idea, but that's not really where people
So,
first heard aspects of that, or first read aspects of that book,
yeah, I
right?
have some background on that. If I think we can go into it on
Yeah.
Kitchen Confidential. So, Anthony Bourdain had actually already published two crime novels before this came out. He was not particularly happy with how his writing career was going. classic experience. So a friend of his wife's shared a literary agent with him and had read an email that he had written to the friend about what it was like opening up a restaurant abroad where he was, and was like, he has to publish a book. And so it's actually a misconception that this very famous New Yorker article he published was the onus for the book. He was already in the process of trying to get that book when this person helped him get the New Yorker article published, which is called Don't Eat Before Reading This, in 1999. The book came out a year later in 2000. And this article was really like the first time we went behind the scenes of this like very gross world of fine dining. Things like don't eat fish on Monday at a restaurant has like stuck in my head for the rest of my life.
I still do sometimes, but yes.
Yeah. And so it was really interesting. Like this book had a pretty modest first printing, 11,000 copies. I mean, not tiny, but not huge. But it just immediately went to number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list. They ran out of copies, but he would go on to publish 15 books. Like he really was a writer, and he found that success through nonfiction writing, whereas on his own he had sort of
he wanted to be a novelist
writer,
and I think this
is see him trying to do in the movie.
I think this is an early example too of like an article kind of going viral before like the internet could really make an article go viral, and it even if it wasn't why he was writing a book, it's what helped make the book the success that it was, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah. It all went together.
And I don't know if you knew this, Sophie, but No Reservations actually came out of his follow-up book, which was going to be called, I think, or was called A Chef's Tour. And that's, they started kind of making a show at the same time. Like husband and wife, I believe, producing partners came to him and started filming kind of a pilot for what would end up becoming No Reservations. I was watching the documentary Roadrunner, which is directed by Morgan Neville, that kind of covers, the rise to fame and his later life, and then ultimately his death that came out in, I think, 2021. And so that gets into some of the details about how sort of the TV personality Anthony Bourdain came to be.
Yeah, it's really interesting, looking at his profile of his whole media career. It's a little bit more like what you see now, where someone has like the book that goes into the show, that goes into the next project, that goes into the restaurant, that goes in. It's a little bit more of how we see those publishing deals even be done now. But
his stuff was very organic in that each thing just kind of happened. And I don't think he planned for, and he never planned to be a TV host. It just kind of happened. And in fact, he was a very reluctant TV host. I
was going to say he was very against like the Food Network like personalities and all that. He thought it was all like really cheap and stuff like that.
Yeah. So now the film is really just a snapshot of Anthony Bourdain's life, and really it's a snapshot of Tony Bourdain before he became Anthony Bourdain. I think that's a good way to think of it. It really just takes place over these 2 months in 1975 in Provincetown. A little bit of background on the movie itself. So it's directed by Matt Johnson. He's a Canadian filmmaker who, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting directors working today. So he broke out with a web series called Nirvana, the Band, the Show, which is about him and his best friend, Jay McCarrol, being in a band that has no songs, but desperately wants to play the Rivoli, a bar in Toronto, and will try anything to play there except just ask to play there. So they kind of get into all these like misadventures trying to get booked to play a show. That was later turned into a TV series for Vice, back when Vice had a TV channel. Matt Johnson is actually working on a movie about Vice right now.
Oh, wow.
And then earlier this year, it became a movie called Nirvana, the Band, the Show, the Movie, which is one of the wildest films you'll see all year. It's one of my favorites. It's very Nathan Fielder coded in that it's this kind of reality mixed with fiction. There's time travel. It's kind of a remake of Back to the Future. It's a real, like, how did they pull this off kind of movie that you're watching it. Like, how were they able to do this? They literally jump off the CN Tower in Toronto, and it's kind of incredible. Tony is his 5th film. It's the first one that he doesn't star in and doesn't kind of resemble the unhinged mockumentary style of his other films. So his first movie is called The Dirties. It's about faking a school shooting. His second movie is called Operation Avalanche, which is about faking the moon landing. And then the movie that really broke him big and got him Tony was Blackberry, which is about the founding and downfall of the company that made the Blackberry cell phones,
Right.
starring Jay
Yes.
Baruchel and Glenn Howerton. Incredible Glenn Howerton performance. I rewatched it on the plane a couple weeks ago, and it holds up, was very good. So Matt Johnson was fielding offers for movies in 2023, and then he met with Dominic Sessa, who had just been in The Holdovers, which was kind of his breakout, his first real acting role. He started opposite Paul Giamatti. And they decided, after kind of having this conversation, they both were aware of this Bourdain movie being talked about. There was a blacklist script for Tony. Blacklist basically means like the best scripts that haven't been produced, written by Lou Howe and Todd Bartles. They knew this was sort of a thing, and they said, we're going to make this movie. And so Johnson and his producer, Matt Miller, kind of rewrote the script. And he's been very open in interviews that he did not set out to make a definitive Anthony Bourdain biopic. Instead, he set out to make a coming of age story that actually blended his own coming of age with Dominic Sessa's coming of age with Anthony Bourdain's coming of age. So I think when you think about the film through that lens, it kind of changes a little bit of how it functions. Whether you care about that is sort of like, neither here nor there, but it is an interesting way to think about how they approached this. Basically, like, they had a lot of shared similarities, Johnson said, and they sort of invited Bourdain's story to the table and kind of
Like
figured
Matt
out.
Johnson and Dominic Sessa had a lot of
Yes.
similarities, but did they have a lot of similarities with Bourdain?
That they went and tried to find the Venn diagram between their three lives and where they overlapped.
This is why, not to say I enjoy the premise of our own podcast, but this is when I enjoy when you tell me things about the movie that I don't know. Because you're responsible for researching it. Because, like, why? But why? So okay.
I mean, that's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. I kind of wish we had Johnson to ask about that, because I'm curious
a little
too.
bit of like my main question about this project. I like this movie generally.
Yeah.
It is a good movie. It's well made. It's well acted. There's a lot of things to really like in it. Why are you telling me that it's about Anthony Bourdain?
Why am I telling you that?
Like,
or
why is
it?
No, sorry. Why is the world telling me that this is a movie about Anthony Bourdain?
Well, it is a movie about Anthony Bourdain. It's a movie about. Well, let's save that for a second, because okay. I wanna get into. I think there's some interesting tension between people who come into this wanting to get the Anthony Bourdain story and people who approach this as a story about a guy named Tony.
Totally.
And this is, in my opinion, a movie about a guy named Tony more than it is a movie about Anthony Bourdain. And there is a lot of invention. There is a lot of blending. Kitchen Confidential, about, I think, 50 pages of it are like the loose basis for this story. It is also based a little bit on a 2014 episode of Parts Unknown, the CNN series where Bourdain goes back to Provincetown, reflects on his heroin use, the heroin epidemic in Massachusetts, and also his time in Provincetown, visits some of the places that he would frequent, some of the people he knew.
I think we both watched that,
there.
Right, Rudi?
Yes.
Did you watch that also?
I did. And there was a great quote from Bourdain that I thought was really fitting for the film. He says in it, I don't even know what I thought I was going to be. This is about his time in Provincetown. At that point, I certainly didn't think I was going to be a cook. I was just hanging out in a beautiful place. And I think that's what this movie tries to capture. I think we both saw that Rolling Stone had their review of the movie said, Tony is not a biopic. It's a superhero fanfic, basically.
Tony isn't a biopic. It's a superhero coming of age fan fiction.
And I think that's the way to think about this. This is building a myth. This is a story about creating the myth of Anthony Bourdain. It's about how Tony became Anthony Bourdain. It's not about Anthony Bourdain, which I know is like probably frustrating to people who want to see like the parts of Kitchen Confidential where he is like in the kitchen and he is, where's the restaurant that he worked? What is it called?
Halls.
Yes. You know, the people really want to see that.
Wrong.
If you want to see a version of that, you're going to have to search really hard to find it, but there is another adaptation of Kitchen Confidential. It was turned into a Fox sitcom in 2005. Oh my God,
I did not know about this until we were looking it up, with Bradley
Cooper as Jack Bourdain. So this is a very loose adaptation, but it's a bit more of his time as an actual chef, where this is
looks
really
like the How I Met Your Mother of Anthony Bourdain, which is kind of painful.
I think I've seen like the pilot maybe, but I don't really remember it enough, and it's really hard to find online, but it's out there somewhere.
I think the idea of someone having just tried to make a straight biopic of him would have made me nauseated. Like, that sounds really, really not great. I love a slice of life. I love when they try and just take one piece and focus on it. It can be so much more impactful.
So I really liked this movie. And I think what I struggled with at first, and probably what you struggled with, it sounds like, throughout most of the film, is I don't feel like I'm watching Anthony Bourdain. Dominic Sessa, I think, captures a version of him, and he certainly like looks the part enough. He, you know, it's close enough where I'm like, it's fine. But here's the thing that I kind of realized maybe like 20 minutes in. We're not watching Anthony Bourdain. We're watching this kid who's kind of like a punk who doesn't know anything, but is really good at lying, which is honestly very similar to Matt Johnson and the characters that he plays. Become someone who is drawn to food and to becoming a chef. Like, it really is this origin story movie. It's not a story about a chef becoming a TV host. It's about a writer becoming a chef and figuring out who he is. And I think when you view it through that lens and just take it as this could be about anybody, I think it's a better movie from that perspective. Whether or not that works on you or you care about that, I mean, that kind of depends on how much you like that. That will impact how much you enjoy this movie, I think, is how much you're willing to let go and just say, I don't care about historical accuracy, and I don't care that this isn't the guy who would go to war-torn countries and show you what was really going on. This is just a kid who's like trying to get laid.
Absolutely. And I think that this is our first time, I think, covering a memoir biopic type situation. And so, look, I am coming at this from the perspective on this podcast of, is this a successful adaptation? Which is probably the wrong question to ask about this movie. And so in asking that question, I was trying to come in here as nuanced as possible around the things that I could still critique, but that feel like they wouldn't have taken away from the director's vision.
Okay.
And so something for me, like the amount of time we spend on the love story. So a lot of this movie is him chasing Nancy, who is sort of his first wife, but not in the same situation.
No.
He does not go to Provincetown chasing a girl. And honestly, a situation where I'm like, if this guy showed up, like, I'm calling the cops.
It's very creepy.
Downright creepy with her the whole time. The amount of the movie that was not to me about him becoming himself or a chef, but about him chasing Nancy, took away from like the overall personal growth and focus of what I wanted.
That's interesting.
And so to me, you could have balanced that with what I would have liked to see, which was like even more food stuff. Because I think,
which is funny because Matt Johnson has said this is not a food movie, and I didn't.
Right. And so I think that's that's an issue to me. Like, ultimately, you're telling me you made a movie even loosely about Anthony Bourdain, and I'm telling you there wasn't enough food. That to me seems like an easy fix. Figure it out is how I feel.
Like there's a decent amount of food. There's some really good food stuff in the film, which we can get to in a moment. But I hear you.
What I did really enjoy.
Fight. I want to argue. We usually don't argue on this show, so let's fight.
I did text you after because you had told me you loved this, and I just wrote, you loved this movie. But I will admit, I am also coming into this, though, as the problem. Like, I love Anthony Bourdain. I've consumed an excessive amount. And this is where it all gets a bit more complicated, where I'm going to share a totally biased opinion, which is that I think Dominic Sessa is an incredible actor. I think he is one of the most annoying people ever, like in terms of the characters he plays. His character in Holdover, I know. but it's really hard. And I think with Anthony Bourdain, I always picture a little bit, I know he was a little shit back then. The
Yeah.
movie starts with a
He was
quote.
kind of a shit when he was an adult too, to some extent, you know?
I love that the movie starts with a quote of him being like, I know I was this like horrible
Yeah.
person back then who needed my ass handed to me. But I did just sort of find the Dominic Sessa version of him like without charm. I'm like, why would anyone hang out with you or be
Well,
around you in any way?
yeah, well, let's talk about that and maybe go through like briefly the beginning of the plot. So it's the summer of
Yeah.
1975. Tony is a student at Vassar. He applies for a writing fellowship, which he does not get. He thinks he's going to spend his summer living in New York, I think, writing, and he doesn't get that. And he had met Nancy, who again, based off of his real first wife, at a bar, and she tells him she's going to Provincetown, and he decides one night after not getting the fellowship, when he's super angry, he's like punching the wall. You can tell there's a lot of rage inside of him, and they do capture the rage that I think stayed with him throughout his life. He decides to just essentially run away from home and go to Provincetown with very little money to his name and no plan to chase
1975
after
is crazy.
Nancy.
Like his parents are just like, oh, you're gone. We've been like kind of worried. Excuse.
So he winds up at this bar called the Flagship. He tries hitting on the bartender there. He's eating oysters.
Poor lesbian waitress was like,
and
leave her alone.
He tells this, story that I think if you've read Kitchen Confidential, we all know this story about the first time he ate an oyster from the sea on a family trip in France that really kind of made him love food and realize what food can be. So there are little touches like that
I will say they do a beautiful job with some little Easter eggs that they work throughout, which I really enjoy.
One of them. And so he's drunk. He kind of gets thrown out on the street by the chef of the restaurant and has nowhere to go. Tony ends up back at the Flagship, and he asks the chef for a job, basically. And he has no experience. He lies about that. He lies that he has kitchen experience, and he gets to be a dishwasher. They need a new dishwasher, so he steps in as a dishwasher, and he starts sleeping on the chef's hammock outside of his house. This is also not based in reality. He
lives in a share house with a bunch of his friends who made him go get a job.
The chef, played by Antonio Banderas, who is wonderful in this film.
Highlight
tender,
of the film.
Like funny. Potential, like I think supporting actor Oscar consideration for him, because he's really, really something else in this.
It's a really, really beautiful performance.
Now, if you've read Kitchen Confidential, he's not really based on the chef of the Flagship, or the Dreadnought, as Bourdain calls it in the book. He's actually based a little more on a chef that Bourdain worked for in New York a couple of years later. So again, there's a little bit of blending and shifting things around. And so we see Tony start working in this kitchen, and it is very much the stereotypical kitchen that you would expect, boys club. And there we meet the Leo Woodall character, Sal, who is incredible in this. I thought Leo Woodall was maybe my favorite performance. He is the womanizer. He's the hotshot, young, like, line cook, or in this case, I guess, oyster shucker. He's got a drug problem. He's got anger issues, and he takes Tony under his wing. You see Tony start to emulate him. If anything, Sal is who we think Bourdain was as a chef, right? Impossibly cool, skilled, but with this like kind of darkness lurking within. And, again, I don't know how true that is to reality. Was there a Sal in his life that he based things off of? But you can see him sort of mimicking Sal as Sal takes him under the wing in the first kind of act of the film.
Absolutely. It's really him falling in love with this misfit, group of characters. And I think really just with a group of like deeply imperfect people, like how they slam the oyster oven shut, how like grab things and it doesn't burn their hands. Like he's soft. He's a liberal arts student at Vassar. Like he comes here and here's like these Boston accented guys doing drugs, and it's all very exciting.
Yeah, and I mean Stavi's really funny, the comedian. Like he's got some great stuff. I mean the kitchen scenes are incredible. Like I thought those were so well done, particularly
That's my favorite part of the movie by far. The parts inside the kitchen are my favorite part.
Yeah. And, it sort of climaxes, I guess the first act or first, half of the movie kind of climaxes. There's a point where Tony and Sal go to buy heroin. Tony starts doing cocaine. Like we kind of see the darkness that would later, color his life. He gets introduced to all of that in Provincetown through this character. And one night after Sal buys heroin, he is late to work, and Chef, who's pretty much just known as Chef, the Antonio Banderas character, doesn't. If you're late, you're fired, or you at least don't get to work again. And that's what happens. He's late, and Tony gets put on oyster shucking duty. And there is just this incredible scene that almost plays out like a horror scene where Tony is like trying to shuck the oyster. He has no idea what he's doing. He's very clearly going to cut his hand, which he does.
Everyone in my theater had their eyes closed. You could like look over, everyone was like, ah.
And then Sal does finally show up and has a confrontation with Chef. He punches Chef and is sent off. And that's when Chef kind of takes Tony under his wing. And this is, I think, where the movie also really starts to become the like coming of age story that, it's been to a point, but this is where we start to see Tony's love of cooking. And again, there are some inventions here. It's very like farm to table, with the chef going out and like getting sea water from from the ocean, and then getting the salt, draining the salt from that, and then putting it into his own salt, making his own ketchup. And it's a beautiful scene. I don't think this really happened in Provincetown in 1975, but still very beautiful and well done. And it's where you start to see Tony get enamored with cooking. And he spends a night at Chef's house inside talking, drinking some disgusting drink. Was it Malort?
Yeah,
I don't know, but
I don't think it was
like
Malort. It was something else.
It was something that is gross. And he learns that Chef was in the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, so planting some seeds there for what would eventually happen with Bourdain. And then they go off on this like amazing late night fishing expedition,
which is a real story.
Yes, and was so good. And
I was so glad we got to see that.
Yeah, I mean that charred tuna that they eat on the beach, looked
striped
so good.
Striped bass.
Oh, striped bass, whatever it was, it looked delicious.
Oh no, I need that charred fish. That looked great.
And all the while, Tony is, as you said, trying to chase after Nancy. Nancy is like working at this pizza place, which is a very famous pizza place in Provincetown. If you've seen the Parts Unknown episode, we actually meet the owner of that place and go to it in that episode.
Nancy was working there in real life.
She was?
When he was
cool.
Yeah, his girlfriend had, or I assume it's Nancy, had a job at a pizza place in Provincetown when he moved there into a shared house.
Very cool. And Nancy's
also,
dating this.
Nancy's gonna get fired from that pizza place. Like these men keep showing up. She's fighting with her boyfriend. He's leaving.
Right, she's dating this other guy, and Tony is like, the whole time Tony is kind of like lying his way through everything. Right, he's telling Nancy that he's here for the writing retreat, that he got it, even though she knows another girl got the writing thing.
No. We got to be honest. Nancy was really pulling the wool over her eyes. He's like, I came to Provincetown to be like mentored by this guy who's clearly on drugs and sleeping with teenagers. Yeah. Also, the casual mention that the Leo Woodall character is just having sex with underage girls. I was like,
yes.
Huh. Okay.
Which is a thing throughout. He puts a notch on, the door frame of every, girl or woman that he beds, which is gross, but also very fitting of the times. And we see him trying to kind of like win Nancy over. She's a photographer, so she's taking photos for his novel. The photos, there's a great montage of them. That
was great
at the end. And things kind of fall apart at a certain point, and that's and it's really because of Tony's Tony's desire to impress Nancy. So he invites Nancy to come to dinner at the flagship because she kind of dismisses it. She's like, "You're just basically working at like a fast food place," and he's like, "No, we do really good stuff there." And he finds a recipe in
lobster thermidor,
basically an open-faced like lobster dish, like slathered in cheese
and
other things.
Great.
It did look good.
I really wanted that.
He finds this recipe and convinces Chef that they should start doing a special Friday night dinner. And this is where sort of like the the chef that we think Anthony Bourdain becomes sort of starts to come out. And this is like totally invented, is my understanding.
Yes.
But whatever, it works for the purposes
No,
of this
I
movie.
loved this. It was fun.
And we get this, again, an incredible kitchen scene where everything goes wrong. And they make the dish and it comes out really great, but they're not ready for this. Like, they are a like fast food kind of,
they serve
place.
lobster rolls, fries, and like one other thing, and oysters, and that's it.
Right. And like, it's meant to be like food that comes out quick. They can't take this kind of care. So there's a grease fire and the flagship burns down. And, Tony's kind of just like, as he is sort of the entire film, he's just kind of like, oh.
It's also because he didn't have proper food safety training. And so he throws something with more oil, I assume.
No, I think he just threw water on it.
Oh, is that not what you do?
I don't think you can, because I think oil and water kind of like fight with each other. And
that
so
it was like
made
oily.
The flame worse.
Oh, yeah. Good. I also don't have proper food safety training, as you can tell, but I don't work in a kitchen. So there we go.
And then, the movie kind of gets a little bit of a neat ending where...
This is where it got schmaltzy.
Yeah, it's a little too schmaltzy. I liked
the movie until this. Like,
and basically,
as we're reflecting, I'm basically sitting here being like, there's more of this movie that I liked than maybe on first thought. I think the end and like the picture perfect ending, like we're having a fundraiser.
Right. Basically, he and Leo Woodall. I mean, there is some darkness there because Leo Woodall breaks into Chef's house trying to rob him because we see like he has a big jar of money earlier. And the intention is to essentially rob him so that Leo Woodall can get drugs. Instead, they try to make money for drugs, which Tony turns into a actually earnest fundraiser for the flagship. Leo Woodall is presenting it as a fundraiser, but it's not really going to be a fundraiser. And so they do a clam bake, which is something that Chef had mentioned to Tony earlier in the film. And they do it on the beach and everyone kind of shows up to support. And then Chef shows up and they have a really nice moment. And the film ends in kind of a full circle way with Tony sitting, not going back to Vassar, but instead sitting in front of an interview panel at the Culinary Institute of America. And Eric Ripert, one of Anthony Bourdain's best friends, gets a cameo, basically says like, why do you think you should like get to study here? You've basically only been a dishwasher. And where Tony is kind of lying in the first scene where he's talking to the professors at the school to try to get the writing fellowship, he's honest in this scene and is basically like, you're right. I don't have the experience to do this. Yeah. But he has a glowing recommendation from Chef and they let him in and that's how the story ends. And it's invented in some ways. It's a little cutesy and schmaltzy and it's meant to make you feel good about a man who we know did some good in his life and lived a great life for portions of his life, but also died by suicide. And
I think there's been some critique. I've seen some critique written about people feeling like the ending is sort of like too optimistic. Yeah. It doesn't sort of like paint what's to come. I'm not commenting on that, but I think people who know his legacy more, that seems like a valid critique maybe. I will say I found seeing Eric Ripert at the end just really moving.
Yeah, same.
I thought that was a really nice cameo. And I really liked the book ending of the two meetings at the beginning and the end.
Yeah, it's a nice bookend.
I found the clam bake like really schmaltzy. And I think that sort of took me out. Yeah, the last part of the movie is where I started to like look at my watch and be like, when are we getting out of here? But I do appreciate the ways they took like the history of the clam bakes, the striped bass, all those things, and they put it in inventive, smart ways.
Yes. And I want to talk briefly about a couple of like filmmaking things and the music, because I think there's some cool stuff there. So these are, again, talking about Matt Johnson as a filmmaker. Usually he's using like mockumentary style, shaky cam, like very unhinged. He used a new cinematographer for this film, and it's Michael Bauman, who also shot One Battle After Another. So it gives it a bit more of a conventional, but still sort of maintains that voyeuristic look that Johnson's films have. And I don't know if you thought about this while watching it, but the shots are often framed as if you are Tony and you're seeing the world as he's experiencing it. There's a lot of things where like kind of you're kind of looking at it through his eyes. The shots in the kitchen are often kind of filmed as if you're peeking in to the kitchen. And I know they filmed a lot of that as kind of like long takes that they would then kind of cut down and just kind of let the kitchen keep sort of like operating. And I believe they actually kept the camera really close to Dominic Sessa in a lot of those scenes, again, to try to emulate that sort of voyeuristic thing. And there's a great quote from Roadrunner, the documentary I mentioned earlier, from Josh Homme, the guitarist of Queens of the Stone Age, who is a close friend of Anthony Bourdain's, appeared on his shows a lot. He said, he's a great American storyteller, but he started off as a voyeur. And so I think that was like a really interesting thing to think about when you think about how they shot this film. The music is done by Jay McCarrol, who's Johnson's longtime composer, best friend, and this co-star of Nirvana, the band, the show, the movie. It's very like mournful and like dissonant at times, very minimal piano based, small. McCarrol said in an interview with the CBC that Tony's really finding out how he's building himself. So a motif gets stretched to be optimistic, and it's stretched the other way to become dark, which you kind of hear in the score. The needle drops are very period appropriate and also reflect kind of the music that Bourdain loved. There's a needle drop of Strawberry Letter 23 by the Brothers Johnson, which is a song that Bourdain mentions in that Parts Unknown episode, hearing when he was in Provincetown. There's a great Modern Lovers drop. There's a Richard and Linda Thompson song, The Stooges, The Faces, like, again, music that either would have been playing at the time or that Bourdain himself liked. And so I love little touches like that. Again, this is, as we discussed, not a totally accurate, not a full biopic of Anthony Bourdain, but there is enough there to make it feel true to that character, or at least that person, and then the character that it tries to create, which again is showing you a version of Bourdain that we never knew. We knew him as an adult. We knew him as someone who was this like super smart, able to talk to anyone about anything, incredible chef, really though, incredible writer and talker about food and food culture. What we're seeing instead is the version who had not figured himself out yet. And I think that that's interesting.
I'm glad that they chose to focus on a younger piece of him, because if you think about it, if we want to engage with Anthony Bourdain as the older person, like think about how much is out there for us to engage with that is actually him and his own thoughts, you know, especially with someone's legacy. I think someone as complicated as Anthony Bourdain, it's always the question of how is it being represented? And with someone like him, we're so gifted to have so much of his writing and so much of his film reel in various and his voice talking and things. And so if you're going to make an artistic project about part of his life, I'm really glad we got one about an earlier part that we have less access to through him.
And that he didn't talk about as much, you know, and that's also part of it. It's really trying to show something that we didn't know, and it may not be accurate, but I still think it's interesting and a compelling film. And again, this movie could have been called Jack and just about a guy named Jack who later becomes a chef, and I would have enjoyed it, I think, just as much. And there's something to be said about that. And so I think we know where Sophie's heading with this, but we will do a quick Sophie's Choice. This is, of course, the segment that is based on a movie that is based on a book, where Sophie decides which she liked more, the, let's say, 50 pages of Kitchen Confidential or the movie. Tony.
Yeah. I mean, the book is one of my all-time favorite memoirs. So my Sophie's Choice is that you should run, not walk, to read Kitchen Confidential if you haven't. I will say, Rudi, I do think that you've talked me into feeling better about this movie than I necessarily was. So I think
that's great.
That's part of the job of us approaching this from different places, is that I come to this with a bias, and I come to this one with a big bias because of how much I love this book and how much I love this person. And I think you've made me understand and appreciate a lot more what the director and filmmaker were, you know, what he was doing and what the purpose of it was. I'm really curious, as we go on with this podcast and ultimately talk about more memoir projects, how we can like keep having this conversation around what do we owe to accuracy when we're adapting a memoir versus adapting a fiction project? When we're doing something that's like reported, we're definitely going to talk about things that are narrative reported journalism, or even articles that get adapted from time to time. Where does accuracy become more important in a project when you're dealing with something that really happened? And where does it not? Where are we still just dealing with the same thing of creating a really nice piece of art? I think objectively, this is like a very nice piece of art. There are critiques I have about it, but it's very lovely. It's a lovely movie. There's some really beautiful performances, especially for August. Like, what a great movie to come out in August. But if I take it in the context of the book and his life, then I start to have those more complicated feelings. And so I'm really excited to keep having that conversation with you around where and when accuracy matters and where it's all open to interpretation.
Awesome. And I would also recommend people read the book. Again, it's also one of my favorites. And check out the movie too. It's really great. And I think you'll enjoy it, even if you only have a passing interest in Anthony Bourdain. And if you do really like him, you might get a little frustrated by it, but try to go in with an open mind. Now, let's go to our conversation with someone who actually knew Anthony Bourdain, Tim Carman. We are thrilled to be joined by Tim Carman, food reporter and critic for The Washington Post. Tim appeared on an episode of Anthony Bourdain's No Reservations back in 2009. And Tim and I used to work together back when I was at The Washington Post. So Tim, first off, thanks for being here.
Of course.
I know, you appeared on that episode of No Reservations. I think you took Tony to Eden Center in Falls Church. You got the chance to spend some time with him. I'm curious, what were some of your impressions of him from kind of spending time with him and then getting to sort of like email with him and know him a little bit over the years after that?
Tony was a complicated person, which, kind of is an obvious thing to say about him. He could be so delightful in person. Although he ran on his own schedule. I mean, the guy, he'd show up when he showed up, but when he was there, he was engaged. And like, I have this very specific memory when I took him to the Eden Center in Falls Church, Virginia. Like, he loved Vietnamese cuisine, maybe more than even French cooking, which he specialized in. And Eden Center, for those who are not familiar with it, it's this hub of Vietnamese food and culture just outside Washington, D.C. And people there, they loved Tony. It's like they knew that he loved Vietnamese food, and they approached him as the celebrity he was. And this was early in his TV career. This was like 2008, I think.
Right.
And he took time to talk to everybody and took time to have them do selfies with him at a time when people don't even have like smartphones. They just use a flip phone, He was very gracious, and then he was very out when he was done. Like, the guy had really strong boundaries, but he was also just really good with his time, and maybe, too good with his time, as we've come to learn. It's like he would answer every email that I sent him. He would answer DMs when I asked him for questions. He provided advice, and this would be at all hour of the day.
Right.
And as we've come to learn since his death, it's like maybe he didn't always have the best boundaries. He just he maybe should have taken more care of himself and less worried about my needs, for example.
Sure. Well, after watching the movie, you wrote a piece with the headline, "What the Anthony Bourdain Biopic Misses About His Life and Legacy." And Sophie and I just had a conversation about, all the differences in reality and the fiction that we see in the film. And I think Sophie was a little more aligned with your viewpoint of being a little frustrated with the liberties that the film takes with Bourdain's life. And I sort of like the film in spite of those liberties that are taken. And so I'm curious, as someone who not only knew him but studied his work. You've written about kind of relating to his struggles with depression as well. What irked you about the choices that the filmmakers made in kind of inventing aspects of what really becomes Bourdain's origin story?
So I want to be clear. I think there's many good things about the movie. I think Matt Johnson had his heart in the right place with this movie. I really think he and his collaborators spent a lot of time trying to understand Tony, and they had an impossible task in many ways. They didn't do a cradle to grave biopic. And maybe that's frustrating for people like me who wanted a broader view of Tony. Yeah. But they made the decision to focus on this really brief period in Provincetown, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod. And they try to use it as this formation of Tony's adult personality. He kind of comes in unformed, not sure what he wants to do, but he's full of himself, like maybe many of us were at that age. Yeah. We didn't know what we wanted and didn't know what we didn't know, but thought so highly of ourselves that, we just had these grand dreams and we foisted them out in the world. And so their decision to do that, I think, was smart in a way, but they took some liberties with time frame. They collapsed 2 summers into one. They collapsed characters. And I think my biggest frustration was that they invented this chef mentor. He was played by Antonio Banderas, who is fabulous. But it's a complete, it's a complete artifice. It's made up. And the idea here is that Banderas's character has such gravitas and character that he is able to provide this mentorship to Tony in a way that, as the film implies near the end, that he is on the right path towards being the Tony Bourdain that we eventually meet, in books and in TV and on film. And that's just not the way his life panned out. It's like it took him years to become the Tony that we knew. And he had some really dark periods before then, and if you've read it, you've read his work, he was fairly brutal towards himself, I would say, in his depictions of those kind of in between years before he became, he was just Tony the hash slinger, Tony the French chef, the wannabe French chef, who was scoring heroin in between, services. And it was a dark period for him. And that is not the implication of the movie. And I think for people that don't know Tony's history, that haven't read his books, haven't watched a lot of his shows, these biopics can take a life of their own. And my concern is that people will see that this is how Tony became Tony. And to me, that's just not the case. Tony was formed in a much more fiery crucible than that.
Yeah, Tim, this is something we were just discussing among the two of us, which is how different is our conversation around what do we owe to the source material in an adaptation when the source material is a memoir and is someone's life. And I can tell you, coming into this, I had a lot of the same sort of feelings. And after talking to Rudi, who researched more of the movie and sort of seeing, it's a blend of Dominic Sessa's life, it's a blend of the director's life, it's a blend of Tony's life. And this idea of well, but do people know that? We just think it's a biopic of him. And so, yeah, I understand he's saying in interviews that I just simply did not read. But is the average person doing the type of research you're doing before a podcast? And so where does that responsibility come in, and does it matter?
Yeah, 100%. And I only learned recently that I think it was a conversation on the Big Picture, which is a good a podcast,
Yeah.
where
We're
like
fans.
they
Yeah,
interviewed
we're fans.
Matt Johnson, and Matt talks about like it is a mixture of Tony's life and Dominic's life and his life, and it almost becomes this composite Matt instead of being a Tony Bourdain story. And I think Matt even struggled with whether or not to be explicit in saying this is an Anthony Bourdain movie, but he had to cave in to commercial concessions.
Exactly.
I will say that I saw this at an early screening that was like the mystery movie of the week. Like, the chains all do like a Monday night mystery screening. And I went to see this, and at the end, there was at least one person who kind of like gasped, because you don't actually hear the name Anthony Bourdain until the very end of the film.
It
And I
starts
think
with a quote from Kitchen Confidential.
but I don't think it says Anthony Bourdain. Or maybe they walked in late. But anyway, he says his name at the very end. And I bet there are other people who are coming into this not even realizing that this is the Anthony Bourdain origin story, quote unquote. And Tim, I'm curious, do you think there was a better way to approach a movie about Bourdain? Is there a different period that you'd focus on?
I'm not a filmmaker.
But you know a lot about his history, so I'm curious. Is there something that's maybe more ripe for building this like myth or this story of Tony Bourdain?
There was a moment. I don't know if you went back and watched the Provincetown
I did,
episode.
Yeah.
So there is that moment where he goes to the rehab center with the woman who is, trying to clean her life up. And I'm sorry, I can't remember her name now.
Yeah, it's okay.
But she, it's this really compelling scene where these people are talking about their addictions and struggling with them. And Tony, like he often did, sits in the circle and talks about himself and says, Provincetown was the place where he first scored heroin. And I think he says he's ashamed to report that the first time he did heroin, he stood in front of a mirror and smiled because he was so happy. And then he talks about his responsibility to his young daughter and how he would explain this to her, like this chapter of his life. And he's like, he's struggling with that question, but he's also says that he's in a better place and that he knows, the path forward. And the bigger suggestion here is that Tony has grappled with his own addictions and grappled with his life and grappled with his demons in his past. And he's okay now. And you don't have to worry about him. But we all know the coda of that story. It's like he really hadn't. And I was really struck by that. It's like, if you started a story with that kind of opening, like someone lying to himself, basically, still in denial about his past and all the things that eat away at him, and then show it up to a certain point, and I don't know, like I thought that moment in the Provincetown episode of with Parts Unknown.
Parts Unknown, yeah.
Yeah. It was such a revealing moment about Tony.
Right.
The level of denial that he had about his own life. And, that happens to all of us. Like we come to a point where we grapple with things that we need to at a certain point in our lives. And it hadn't come for him yet, but he was projecting out into the world that he was good. He didn't need anybody's help. And that to me was Tony in a nutshell. Like, he was so good at being Tony, the character, the one that people expected him to play. And that was not just a character, that was him. I mean, that was legitimately him, but there was so much more to him that he hid. And well, grappling with that scene in some way cinematically would have been
Yeah. Well,
fascinating
it's
to me.
because it reveals the human behind the persona that we all knew. And you wrote a really touching piece shortly after he died called Anthony Bourdain Was the Best Friend I Never Had, which I think is such a interesting way to put it. And I think you're kind of getting at this with this a little bit too, is that there was a version of Anthony Bourdain that you knew, right? That felt like this best friend that I never had, that would answer your emails, that would have Vietnamese food with you. But there's also a version that you never knew and never got to see, that we never got to see, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
and that's what's
It very well did.
so magical about that Parts Unknown scene, is that he's revealing a piece of himself that he otherwise kind of kept shrouded to all of us.
Yeah, it's only like we know after his death that this is a part of himself that
Right.
he was blind to.
Right. Yeah.
And we don't even really know what that is either, because he can't explain it to us. He didn't grapple.
Well, I think that was one of the things that was so remarkable when he died that impacted people so much, as this is a person who had talked a lot about their mental health and a lot about their past, and a lot of us realizing that we simply just had no idea what was going on. And this idea of, I'm talking about a thing in my past, not the thing that might lead to my, taking my own life, I think was just really so shocking in the moment. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying about how it's framed. Something Rudi and I were just talking about was, I understand that the clam bake comes directly from the book in a different way where that story is told. But to me, it's just very like PTA, like we're all going to save the school at the end,
Right.
this like very rosy picture. And then he's going to get into the school. And you're so right. It really is presenting it as this is in the past. This is over, in a way that does, as you talk about it, feel inauthentic to his story.
Yeah, he had so much more yet to deal with. I feel like I'm being very harsh on the film, and I do that because I think I had a relationship, a
Right. It's
professional
something
relationship
It's like
with Tony,
Yeah.
and knew him, and I wanted to see more complexity. But most of the people that I've talked to, they seem to really enjoy the movie and see it as a coming of age biopic that I'm not even sure they care if it's about Tony
Well,
Yeah.
specifically.
I literally would kind of end the earlier part of our episode saying that this could have been a movie about Jack Bourdain,
Anyone.
and it would have been fine. I would have enjoyed it, even if it's not about Anthony Bourdain, because I think it's a well-constructed coming of age story. The challenge is that there is this baggage of a memoir that millions of people have read and loved, and a personality that even more people have seen and listened to and watched. And I'm curious, Tim. It's been what, 8 years now since Bourdain died.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about the way he's been kind of mythologized since his death? Because this is another example of mythologizing him. This is creating an origin story that is not entirely true to reality.
No, that's exactly right. And I think there's almost a cottage industry now of people that want to talk about what Tony would have felt about this or that, and that's an exercise that I think just leads to futility ultimately. Tony wasn't a saint, and he knew it.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to be a saint, although he was such a giving guy. You read stories of him providing money, helping others, and, doing this and doing that. And that was a part of him. But he was a mysterious dude. He kept large parts of himself concealed. And I don't think this deification, this mythologizing of him, I mean, it's a human nature to do that when someone so beloved, I think, departs, especially the way that he died.
And younger than they should have been.
Of course. And we all miss him. I mean, there's some days I really miss him. I was looking back some DMs that he sent me, like 2015 when I was working on a story. And God, he was so funny. I mean, he was cutting up this one chef that I was going to go interview in Dallas. And he was telling me, don't trust him. Don't say, don't believe a word out of his mouth. He said he's charming, like Ted Bundy. and I was just like, man, I miss this guy. Yeah. But he wasn't a saint. Yeah. He wasn't a saint. And I wish we could just let him be human again.
Tim, last thing I wanted to bring up. We didn't prep you for this question, so I'm going to just put you on the spot. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. We like to ask our guests what is the one book they'd love to see be adapted into a movie or a TV show. So what I'm going to ask you to kind of flip it a little bit is there a food memoir or food book that, or a chef's story or something like that you would like to see be adapted into a film or TV show?
That is a good question. So the first one that comes to mind, it's, and I have to be honest, I don't even know if there was a movie version of this, maybe somewhere in the UK, but Marco Pierre White's memoir, Devil in the Kitchen, Sex, Pain, and Madness and Making of a Great Chef.
Oh, great title.
Oh, it's so good.
Great title.
It's very dark. And, Marco Pierre White was a madman. He truly was a madman in the kitchen. He was in the era when you could just be abusive. And he did not try to sugarcoat it. His memoir was not meant to make himself look good. And I would love to see a filmmaker grapple with that in 2026 because that's such a sensitive topic. And kitchens want to have you believe that that's a era, thing in the past. But boy, it shaped a lot of chefs and a lot of cooks. And I think that would be a telling one to turn into a biopic.
Love that. That's a great recommendation, Tim. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It was great to see you. And we will see you next time. Thanks, y'all.
Good talking to you both. It was a great conversation.
Good talking to you, Tim.
Tim.
Right. It Was a Book First is hosted and produced by Sophie Berschbaugh and Rudi Greenberg. Music written by Cliff Blum and John Connolly, produced by Kevin Potts. Logo by Trisha Louise Prieto. Website by Kevin Fobb. Follow us on Instagram at It Was a Book First Pod, and we'll see you next week.